Ecofuturists takes on the challenge of imagining a brighter, greener, cleaner future through conversations and big ideas. Get ready to join the conversation. This is Ecofuturists. From perhaps naive or well-meaning intentions, we find ourselves scratching our heads on how to turn back time on what has become one of Australia's most out-of-control environmental disasters, the introduction of invasive species, causing billions of dollars of agricultural impact and continuing to drive our native animals to extinction. Government have poured millions of dollars into their control, but these invaders are still with us. And the average Australian seems to have switched off and just accepts these invaders as the new norm. A new ABC series, Eat The Invaders, takes an intentionally controversial approach to reignite the conversation by asking, can we control invasive species by eating them? So let's find out more about the ideas that have gone into the series from the creators themselves, Matthew Bates and Poppy Fitzpatrick, a couple of Australians I'm really impressed with, who are reimagining how we take complex and sometimes boring environmental topics and make them more accessible to a general audience. This is why my guests today are Ecofuturists. Matt and Poppy, welcome to Ecofuturists.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Well, thanks. You rang me up about 18 months ago.
Did I?
You did. And I think you had a bit of a wacky idea at that time, and you just wanted to test out a kind of truth test for the wacky idea.
I did.
I remember
now.
Yeah, remind me.
Cast my brain back to 18 months ago. Yeah. I contacted you. You weren't the first person I contacted.
Oh, I feel...
You should be...
I feel a little bit hurt now.
I know you should.
Yeah.
No, I contacted the Invasive Species Council.
Oh, did you? Oh, wow.
Port of call.
Yeah.
And because their name...
We might come back to them later, right?
Yeah. But I mean, they were the first port of call. And the reason I contacted you was because they kind of poo-pooed my crazy idea.
And what was your crazy idea?
My crazy idea was to make a show called Eat The Invaders, which was... the concept being, could we eat our way out of the ecological disaster that invasive species have wrought upon this country?
Yeah.
Or at least, where does eating play a part, or could eating play a part in at least the control of invasive species? So
what happened there? Were you kind of lying in the bath one day and suddenly this idea came to you, or did you pick it up from somewhere else?
I picked it up from somewhere else. Actually, a woman that we work with at the ABC called Kalida Corrigan, who's a commissioning editor at the ABC, it was 2 Christmases ago. I remember I'd just come off a couple of projects and had nothing lined up, as we work very hand to mouth in this industry, and I had nothing in front of me, and it was literally before Christmas. I was getting a bit hungry for the next idea, like what am I going to do next year? And weirdly, it literally
thinking about Christmas presents in a year's time. Like, I'm going to buy those. Right, better come up with a good idea. Yeah.
Well, it landed in my lap. Like, so Kalida sent me this book that this artist had written called Kirsche Kashella, who is married to David Walsh, who owns Mona Museum in Tasmania. He's a billionaire, philanthropist, gambler, raconteur, whatever he is. And she'd done an artwork called Eat the Problem.
Eat the Problem, I remember that.
Yeah. which was a
It was a kind of installation, wasn't it?
It was
and then with a book.
That's right. It was a kind of series of feasts, and her proposition was, can we eat the problem? Can we eat invasive species as a mechanism of control or eradication?
And the tagline is, can we turn shit into gold? Is sort of the
That's right, yeah, this sort of alchemical idea of shit into gold. And she'd put on these feasts, these incredible feasts with her chef, Vince Trim. And what was like a series of feasts of cat and carp. And I just thought that was a really interesting idea. I hadn't read the book, but I just literally loved this idea. I've always been into cooking shows, secretly wanted to make a cooking show. I make these quite high art, sort of weird concepts art films usually, but I've always wanted to secretly make a kind of a cooking show. Anyway, and this was a great mix of art and food, and it just had all this kind of these amazing ingredients. And yeah, I just wrote this pitch document, like literally it came really quickly, and it was good. It was a good pitch document. I know,
when it comes together.
Yeah. And I put Tony Armstrong photograph in the pitch document.
I remember that.
Yeah, I made it kind of...
Because we did it digital, and then you had a kind of reveal of Tony.
did. I revealed this great
Tony
thing about like, we need...
Tony in the bar.
Yeah.
We need a First Nation... We absolutely needed a First Nations host, and he was obviously such a great sort of personality. But the First Nations angle was incredibly important to me, also because obviously Eat the Invader, just leaning to that idea of like this country being in... Well, to me, the whole show is about like the effects of colonization on Australia.
That's right.
Really, that's one of the, I know you're a scientist, but beyond the science, beyond all of that, was post-referendum, post-no vote, I was really angry about the way this country
was. In some of the early scripts, it looked like you were inciting cannibalism. So that was one of them. Poppy, how did you get involved with that? Were you tempering Matt, or were you kind of egging him on? How were you brought in?
Maybe tempering is more my role, but just kind of digging out like this idea and seeing where it could go. But I loved the idea as well, because like documentary is just an interest, and this idea, like you were saying, of like sort of the documentary element, but with like art and food and science. It's just like this perfect way to like serve it up, so to speak, in like a palatable way. It was super exciting. Yeah, I just was reading and digging and finding things and sending them to Matt.
I remember the conversation that we had, and also when we first met as well, because Matt kept on saying, "Do you think this is a good idea?" I was going, "Well, it is. I mean, of course we eat rabbit. I mean, if we talk about some of the invasive species, rabbit and deer, they're invasive species here in Australia. Of course, they're delicious to eat. So why not? Why not eat them?" And I think then that kind of dispelled some of your fear around putting some of those ideas
Council had
forward.
put me off. I almost sort of said that by doing this show, I personally would be making this worse, the situation. Like literally they'd gotten to that point where they tried to kind of scare me off the idea. So I came to you to just verify. That's right. Is this right? Are they being curmudgeonly, or what's the situation here? And if I hadn't met you guys, I don't think there would have been a show. I was literally at that point of like saying it's too difficult. Okay, and now we're riding the storms. So you've been presented, you've come up with a good idea, you've got some feedback, but there's potentially then a barrier to actually getting the message through. And Poppy, we did a lot of work, I think, around kind of some of the science research. Yeah. How did you go about then researching people to get kind of a balanced view for what is potentially quite a controversial topic?
Yeah, I think when the Invasive Species Council tried to sort of kibosh it, it scared me maybe more than you, because I was like, oh no, we can't like stir the pot too much, and Matt's got a natural inclination to do that, which is good. But I sort of think that's why, you and Phil coming in and sort of being open to the idea of like this sort of innovation. And when we found that happy medium with being sort of like allowing the innovative idea and the shocking idea, but then, and finding the balance within and making sure to acknowledge what they were saying. Because I think what they're saying is important, and it was important to punctuate that and make sure people understand that in the show, that it isn't just the solution.
So let's be clear, the Invasive Species Council is a body, it's more a lobbying body to encourage the control of invasive species. Yes. So on the face of it, they're there for good, to help with the problem. But, there are a number of different opinions and scientifically backed opinions that are out there about how you control invasive species. And we myself and Phil Cassie, we got involved with you to actually kind of bring some of that science content in to the program, which I'm pretty proud about, and I actually really enjoyed that kind of interaction. But for me, I think the other thing was that, science can be a bit dry sometimes. And so, how do you make a science topic interesting, palatable, exciting even, and it still has some message behind it that's useful? And I think this for me is what the Invaders kind of presented. It presented a package of something, exciting and interesting that people could engage with, but then it had a kind of the Trojan horse of science messaging that could sit within that. I felt that. Did you guys?
Yeah. And I think that that's something that we tried to communicate to the Invasive Species Council as well, was like that you can't necessarily get, well, their understanding was that you can't get that same nuance in television that you would in, say, like writing or in a scientific journal. But I mean, like, do you feel like we managed to make something palatable but still maintain integrity? Like,
I do. I think anybody watching or listening to this should definitely watch the series. So Eat The Invaders on ABC. I think, look, as always happens, I think with editing, some of the complexity has to be edited out for a TV audience. But I think in the end, the 6 episodes in the series, they navigate some really complex issues around invasive species and come down on a landing place of, well, probably eating them isn't the solution, and there are other ways to control invasive species.
Yeah, so, I mean, it was always meant to be a conversation starter. I think that, we in a lot of the negative press that has come out about it, there's been a bit of it. They've been fixated on the title alone, like Eat The Invaders, as if we're suggesting that this is the be-all and end-all. But it's really just the beginning point of the conversation. We're just saying...
Some of the trailers may have amped that up a little bit. Come on, Matt.
I agree entirely. I agree entirely. But yeah, it's not the be-all and end-all. We're not saying it's the silver bullet.
Don't just watch the trailers. Watch the episodes.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Good thing is that they've backflipped now, Invasive Species Council, and they're now promoting the show.
Oh, good.
We should be watching it.
Can we not mention them anymore now? Is that okay? Who are they? Yeah. I mean, the key concern is really that by promoting eating invasive species, you're going to generate a market for those. So, I mean, in no way do we imagine that eating or mobilizing Australia to eat invasive species is going to control the problem. That's not what the series says, not what the science says. We need other methods like, new viruses to control rabbits, control and keeping cats indoors, making sure they don't go feral, and then other ways of controlling those animals. Eating is not going to be the solution. But in terms of the problem with promoting eating invasive species is that you're then potentially generating a market for those invasive species. So then there's an incentive to keep invasive species around Australia because you've generated a market for that. And actually, not just the Invasive Species Council, but also the deer hunting lobby group are strongly in that camp. So did you get any feedback from that group when you were making the program?
From the deer hunters lobby? Yeah. Well, we include them.
They were going, promote deer.
Well, yeah, we did. We have a couple of hunters in the show, in the deer episode. Yeah. And I think it's great that we get to hear their point of view. I don't necessarily agree with their point of view, but it's fantastic that we represent them, because certainly in Tasmania, where we shot that episode, they are such a kind of powerful lobby group. Even though they're quite small, they have some sort of political weight, which is amazing. But yeah, they were great, weren't they? They were good, good talent.
And it's interesting that, like, the science is one thing, but the social and cultural reasons for either preserving or eradicating, like, they're really complex, and it's still like an important part of the picture, because it either prevents or promotes people from, managing or wanting to preserve species. And it's like, as kind of complex and difficult as it makes things, it's important to acknowledge.
I thought it was important that we include them, so that because they often get portrayed as these kind of mad right-wing kind of gun-toting freaks.
Yep.
There's an element of that everywhere, on the left and the right. And as Poppy was saying, that a lot of these hunters have come from families 3 or 4 generations old, and they've hunted. Hunting is part of their culture, part of their sort of family tradition. And I felt like that was a really important thing to include. Obviously, and they take deer out of the environment, don't they? Yeah, which is a good thing.
That's right.
It's not the solution.
No.
But they should be included in the conversation.
And in many places, those hunters are actually used to control the animals as well, besides taking them for food themselves. And let's be clear, many invasive species that have been introduced here to Australia, or many species that have now become invasive, were originally introduced for hunting.
Yeah.
You know, gentlemen and ladies would go out and hunt at the weekend. And certainly that's the case for deer and rabbits.
They were here for food. I mean, that's why I think the Eat The Invaders, they were brought here to eat.
Right. We introduced them to eat
food.
So yeah, it's a bit of an irony that then it backfires and then we don't touch them.
And then we don't eat them. Yeah, we're not eating carp. We don't eat rabbits.
That's right.
You know, yeah, it's crazy.
I think that's where the hunters do come into an important part of the conversation, where it's like, there's the extreme sort of left of eradication being the goal, which if it's possible, it should be, of course. But I think in so many cases, we just found that eradication, as it stands with the resources we have, it is impossible at the moment. Yeah. And that shouldn't prevent us from trying. But while they are here and while we are, you know, having to manage them, then why shouldn't they be a food source, or why shouldn't we involve people that are going to remove them from the environment in that conversation?
That's the key issue. We are not going to be able to control some invasive species like cane toads, like rabbits, like carp. What we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to knock back the populations occasionally by introducing viruses or other control elements, but the notion of eradication of these invasive species, it's gone. You know, we've missed it. Yeah. We may be able to eradicate invasive species in some areas. So deer, we might be able to remove from the Adelaide Hills, but, you know, deer are now part of the ecosystem over in, you know, the East Coast and down in Tasmania. So you're not going to be able to completely remove them. So do you keep pushing to remove them? I mean, you probably need to keep pushing to keep knocking the populations back because they do so much damage.
What about just the final thing about the funding around this? Like, because you were saying, what's interesting is that we could solve this with more money, right? Is that something like, so you could, it's just, why don't we sort this out then? Why does the government not,
I think,
concern itself with this? So this is an environmental crisis that we're living through, right? Invasive species are devastating this country, but the government are not really...
One of the top 5 causes of extinction of native animals.
But you, as a scientist at the sort of coalface of this problem, you're saying that we could solve this with more money. Money is the problem.
I think so I think the issue is that there have been real drives to remove some of these invasive species. So if we take rabbits, for example, you know, you have different calicivirus that's introduced, so that costs money to develop. Now, the funding for that probably sits as a basis of funding that comes through Department for Environment, special initiative funding that comes through from Treasury, and then research funding that comes through from the Australian Research Council. And so, and you've probably got some aspects of researchers saying, well, I've got the magic bullet, you know, we're going to kill all the invasive species, all the rabbits. They try it out and then it doesn't quite work. It doesn't kill off the last ones. And then the rabbit problem comes back again. So there's probably some funding fatigue that's associated with invasive species, and there's you know, what else do you spend your money on? If you spent this much money in the past on invasive species, sure, we could increase that by 10 times and maybe it's going to work next time. But are we better off by spending that money onto building resilience in ecosystems and looking at other methods of suppression that's going to drive down the invasive species problem, but still allow the native species to proliferate? So I think that's probably where we're at. We're probably at a stage of management of suppression, but still introducing control measures that may or may not eradicate. But certainly more funding would help drive that solution and would help with the suppression.
If you could wave a magic wand right now and eradicate one invasive species, what would it be?
Rabbits.
Really?
Because without rabbits, large rabbit populations drive cat populations, and they also eat the vegetation. So it would be a toss-up for me between cats and rabbits.
Mm.
And so interestingly, with disease as well, if you have a bacteria, if you have a really lethal bacteria, it's a really dumb decision as a bacteria, because you don't want your host to die, because you want your host to pass you on to their friends, and then you pass on, and then you become super invasive. I don't know. Do you ever? There's a board game called Pandemic. Have you ever played that?
No.
It became quite popular around COVID time. But so the way to kill the Earth's population of humans is to develop a bacteria that is super invasive. So it's super transmissible. So any air it goes around, there's a real delay in the development of symptoms. So 4 weeks to 8 weeks. And then once the symptoms develop, you die really quickly. So if you're going to develop kind of the perfect kind of disease organism for these invasive species, it would have those principles. So you'd be able to spread the disease throughout the population first before symptoms became, and then you kill the animals really quickly. If money was no object, you could potentially design diseases that are specific to that animal. You'd have to make sure that, and then had that type of profile.
Interesting.
Yeah,
maybe don't give me money, right?
Yeah, that sounds terrifying.
Did you guys manage to eat anything really interesting as part of the
show?
Sure
did. Yeah, lots of stuff. I mean, obviously the most interesting and most provocative is cat, and that was, that was just an incredible experience.
Yeah.
The whole experience in Kirakura. I mean...
Come on, cat. You ate cat?
We ate cat.
Did you eat cat?
I did eat cat.
Okay, what does it taste like? Don't say chicken. Yeah.
Well, Tony, who was... Well, the backstory is we went to a place called Kirakura, which is the most remote community in Australia, in WA, in the middle of the Gibson Desert. And that was just an incredible experience, like landing in this place and driving across country from Alice, 10 or 11 hours into the desert.
West from Alice.
From Alice.
Yeah.
Northwest.
Yeah.
Just incredible. I'd never been out
landscapes
on country like that before.
Yeah.
I mean, and it was just incredible. And then to go out hunting with the women there who are rangers, and they are looking after and protecting their lands there, particularly the bilbies, who are being kind of wiped out by the cats there.
Yeah.
So we went out, we checked this trail cam and found that there was a cat operating in the area, and then the women were just like, all right, we're onto it. We're onto it.
Which is amazing, because we're going along in these like troopies, and they can just look out the window and spot the paw prints from a mile away, and they could tell you like, it's a female, it's pregnant, it was here 3 hours ago, like down to really minute detail. Incredible.
So the experience allows them to read the land.
Yeah.
Literally out the window of this
going
car.
like 40 k's an hour, so it wasn't slow. And they're like, stop, there it is.
But we'd also stop. What was great about it as well is we'd stop every now and again, not for the cat, because they wanted to eat the grab a goanna that they just found. So we'd be stopping and then jump out. A woman would go and quickly dig, pull out a goanna, kill the goanna, and put it in the back of the truck, and then we'd go. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway, it took about an hour, and we tracked this cat down. Yeah, we sort of spread out, and Poppy was the one that caught it on all the big cameras. It was hard to kind of navigate. We're running through the kind of desert with these big cameras trying to chase these older women as well. They were probably in their 60s, 70s, and they were
outpacing you guys, right?
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we heard this big scream, and Poppy was nearby.
I've been trying to stay out of the line of the camera and like hide in the car, because I'm like, I don't want to get caught and like, be just this random crew member. But then, eventually it just ended up, I was in the car that was next to the cat when they got it, which was, amazing. They just sort of, the goal is to just chase it for long enough that it tires the cat out. And then that means that they can find it more easily. And it was just hiding sort of in a bush.
And then they checked its stomach, and that was incredible. Incredible footage, but incredible to see the result and the reason that this is happening.
So you could open the stomach.
You can't open the
stomach. And what did you find?
A hopping mouse, a goanna.
Yeah.
And as she was saying, I think it was like 4 maybe like items of food that maybe like 4 creatures, like varying in size, like a mouse and goanna.
Lizard.
But and as she was saying, that in the digestive system, that's only in a few hours what's found in the stomach at that point. So imagine what it's doing over the course of its lifetime, and that kind of really brought it into perspective, I think.
And this is where you get this figure of 3 billion animals taken a year from feral cats. So yeah.
Yes.
So you caught the cat.
We caught the cat, and then we went back to camp, and then we had a cook up, and we ate all. They cooked up the goannas and the cat, and it was amazing actually. Obviously, the ABC were quite resistant to us showing too much of this on camera, and certainly
for some reason.
But it just felt so right in the moment that, and certainly with Tony being there, having this experience on camera, the first thing he was given was a bit of liver, which was I remember being behind the camera and was like, oh wow, that's quite intense. Cooked liver, So they bury it in the coals, and kind of 45 minutes later, and sort of next sort of camp oven, and he got right into it. And then he was given this sort of basically like a Maryland, like a chicken Maryland, like a leg, and had he said later it was like the greatest rotisserie chicken he'd ever eaten. So, and I had a bit, you had a bit. I like the goanna more, but the cat was okay.
The goanna was sort of like fish in texture, but then the chicken was like, the cat was, as everyone always says though, it was a lot like chicken, maybe like on its way to something a bit heartier, like duck or
so a little bit gamey.
Kind of, but surprisingly like white meat.
The other white meat.
The other white meat.
I think the weirdest thing, I just come back from Vietnam, and the weirdest thing that I ate, we went to a snake restaurant.
Oh yeah.
And we selected a snake to be eaten, and then we were served up 2 drinks. One was red and one was green. Oh
yeah, the blood and
it's a kind of the red pill or the green pill, and the red pill, the red liquid was obviously blood mixed with rice wine, and the green one is bile mixed with rice wine. And then they served a small bowl with a small red thing in it, and it was beating. And it's a snake heart.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And as the guest of honour, I had to eat the snake heart.
How was that?
Well, I spilled it down with the rice wine, but I probably not sure I should have been eating uncooked snake heart with the blood. It's probably not something.
But you're here.
Parasites usually take about 6 months.
We'll talk to you in 6 months.
That's right. Maybe I'll go for the test soon. But and I think that's another thing that this show also touched on is, I come back with a story from Vietnam about eating snake heart.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, and I tell it at parties and things like that. But we are squeamish around a range of foods that are potentially, or a range of species that are potentially good foods.
Absolutely. I mean, I just got back from Japan, and horse is on almost every menu. Horse tartare, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Chevaline butchers in France, they're horse butchers. I didn't realize, again, when we were researching this, how widely it's eaten. But here in Australia, because we've watched The Man from Snowy River too many times, the idea of it is so...
It's a bit like eating Bambi, is it? Yeah.
It's very controversial.
Yeah.
We were going to do horse as an episode, actually, and we were advised not to. Let's put it that way.
The compromise was keeping cat.
Keep cat.
Keep cat,
Throw horse under the
bit
bus.
of horse trading, right? Yeah.
I think that was one of the best lines from Matt in that early development when we were deciding the species for each episode was he said, can't make a documentary about invasive species without a cat. It's like making a documentary on World War II and not including Hitler. They were trying to make us not do cat. But that's interesting.
Which is impossible.
And it's interesting in itself that why would we not do this one animal compared to another? It's like, who are we to kind of value those like hierarchy of what animals matter and what don't? It's sort of like, how is the life of a deer that we are used to eating different to the life of a cat? They're both sentient animals to some degree.
That's some of the most interesting stuff in that show, I think, is that kind of cultural taboos that we have around certain animals.
Yeah.
Why do we eat a baby pig, but we won't eat a cat or a...
That's right.
It's really, really interesting. It's fascinating, actually. And to find people in Australia who do eat cat as a kind of cultural practice and part of their land management. I just think that's going to be so revealing to Australians to see that. It's going to shock people, and there's going to be people that come out and sort of, think it's this savage thing, but it's just not. It's just not.
Far more ethical than just buying your meat off the shelf, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the things as well for me around the program was there was quite a focus on, haute cuisine, and you had some chefs in that preparing various dishes, and obviously, that features in Mono and the reveal at the end of each of the programs. But the other thing that I really liked is you tried to bring back that food to the average person. And I think that the best episode for that is rabbits.
Yeah.
And it's with the CWA, and you've got somebody there that remembers eating rabbit. And
we lived on it. Australians lived on rabbit.
Had some great recipes, and you did rabbit pie, and you got the kids to try them, and most of them said that it's really great. So, yeah, we used to eat rabbits.
We lived on it. I mean, like, we got through the Depression, World War II. They were sending not bully beef; they were sending canned rabbit a lot of the time. So it sustained our nation through these really difficult times.
So what happened? Why did we stop eating rabbit?
Myxomatosis. I think the viruses came in, and obviously, again, we explored this in the show. But the viruses came in and did an incredible job. But they don't. The rabbits obviously develop resistance to myxomatosis. Then they come in with calicivirus, and they develop resistance against that. But it kind of, because they became diseased and they looked a bit sort of manky.
Nobody wants to eat a manky rabbit, right?
Nobody wanted to eat the manky rabbit. So, but they're still out there. I mean, there are a lot. We ferreted rabbits in the show, and they didn't have myxomatosis. We ate those, so they're out there, and it's still possible to eat wild rabbit. But yeah, the kind of national vision of them as a delicacy is or a food source is gone.
So if you did want to eat invasive species, if you went down to your local butchers and said, I want some deer or some rabbit, you're buying animals that are farmed. You're not buying wild caught animals. So the only way really to do it is to go out there with your gun and go hunting yourself.
Yeah, I guess so. That's right.
There are some businesses that do harvest from the wild. I don't know if there are any in Adelaide for deer and rabbit, but they do sometimes have camel in the Adelaide Central Markets. That's wild muster.
Wild caught,
And in Victoria at the markets there, we did get wild caught rabbit.
Okay.
And I know there's a few businesses in Victoria that wild harvest venison.
But it's interesting.
So it's possible. It's just not prolific.
It's interesting. It's not eaten more. It's strange. I don't fully understand why it's not still. I mean, Europeans love it. I love it. I come from an English background, so we grew up with rabbit. But it's interesting. We don't. It's not available here readily and cheaply.
Yeah.
Why is that? Do we know?
Probably because it's not farmed in the way that we farm other animals. So, chicken, they're just so mass produced that the cost of those has probably remained stable over the last 3 decades, even though, wages have gone up and production costs have gone up. Just the efficiency of our farming systems is so much that they're so cheap. Whereas to go out and then hunt a few animals, bring them back, there's just so much labour involved in that you're probably putting it at a very premium end, unless you're prepared to do it yourself.
Yeah,
I think that's why we probably don't have more of those wild-caught invasive species more readily available. Yeah.
I mean, one of the interesting things, I think, one of the interesting side effects or positive side effects of eating invasive species, say with carp or even with toad, is the effect it can have on an existing market. So with carp, why are we not eating more carp when that could take pressure off overfished oceans, right? Or overfished
because
rivers?
It tastes like mud. Okay, that's
what
one of the
think.
That's what people think,
and it doesn't when prepared properly.
So really tickling carp. I mean, when you see every carp being caught and then gently handled, and then I didn't see how the carp was killed. But does he just tickle it? Like
they go into an ice slurry.
They go into an ice slurry, yeah.
So is the handling really necessary, or is it just gentle handling of the animals?
I think it's the gentle handling of it, but I think it's also the kind of ice slurries and the slow
Yeah.
Death.
Putting to sleep, really.
Putting to sleep.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's because that
Instead of the traumatic response,
yes.
which releases the pheromones that tastes like
exactly.
mud.
It's like a stress histamine and a heat exposure histamine. So it's sort of that heat and stress of the process of killing them. If it just goes into an ice slurry, it's like a slow, well, maybe not slow, but just a more gradual. I don't know.
It's like ikejime spiking fish. You know, there's various ways. If you treat animals in a particular way, ikejime spiking, of course, the Japanese method of putting the spike through the brain, through the central nervous system, which then the quickness of that death preserves the flesh and stops it spasming and does whatever. It stops the meat tensing up.
Yeah. Okay. It's quite interesting. We're getting into the anatomy of death.
I think I think death is a really important part. If you can give an animal a good death, that is really important part of eating, right? It has to be. Bad death, bad eating. It's that simple, really. It's why we need to be thinking more about how our animals are treated. We want them to be humanely reared and humanely slaughtered. The death part is actually really, really important. Not only morally, but also to preserve the meat, to make the meat better. As I say, ikejime spiking a fish is an age-old technique. You pay more now. You pay a premium for a fish that's been killed that way. So the death part is actually really interesting.
Is cooking carp in milk a thing?
Well, again, I
mean, if you have a muddy tasting carp, can you really remove that taste by certain preparations?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
So we've got to say that it's one of the most eaten fish in the world.
Right.
It's one of the most
outside of Australia.
Outside of Australia. It's one of the most
where we have one of the largest populations in the world. Right. Okay. The irony again.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But as we discovered, like we've just been through Christmas, but in Hungary and places in Europe, Europeans keep carp in their baths for a couple of weeks up to Christmas. It's a Christmas tradition. I'm not sure when they eat it, if it's the night before or on Christmas Day instead of the turkey, but carp is one of the main proteins, and they keep it in the bath. They flush it, so you keep it in the bath and it flushes out the carp. Apparently cooking it in milk helps, but you don't need to if you go, if you go through this kind of
cleansing
process. Now, Glenn, is the fisherman who tickles the fish.
Yeah.
He catches the fish, he tickles them, or he strokes them, and as Poppy was saying, gently kills them and then puts them in the ice slurry.
I've got all kinds of sick images going. Anyway, so go on.
Yeah, so it's just, again, it's about preparation.
Yeah.
As one of the chefs that we talked to in the show saying, like, you don't get an olive off the tree and just kind of eat the olive, do you? There's a process that you go through.
The processing is all important.
The process is important. So, again, there's a little bit more process around eating carp, but they are delicious, as we found out. There's a restaurant here, Africola, a guy called Duncan Belgamode, who's in the show, cooked a carp cotoletta, which is a carp schnitzel from the belly of the carp, and it is utterly delicious.
I think we're going to have to get Duncan on the show and talk to him about cooking invasive species. Yeah. You put together a really amazing show, an amazing group of different species, did all the research around there, presented a balanced, view of the problems with invasive species and then also potential control. Poppy, you must have some ideas of species you didn't get to or locations you'd like to go to. So let's say there's a series 2, and I hope you'll be pushing that pretty hard. What would you feature in series 2?
Well, I think a big one that we sort of went down the path of for a while that had a lot of interesting stories around it was the wild pig.
Yeah.
And just there's like some sort of social enterprises being set up, particularly up north, that are trying to employ First Nations people in local areas to like gather and hunt these wild boars, and then they're turning them into a fertilizer. And then the profit of that is just going directly back into the social enterprise. It's like this kind of idea in series 1, we have the long-spined sea urchin, which is a range extending species, not invasive, it's native to Australia, but has moved outside of its normal range. And we could see that is the one scenario where it was very clear that eating them and having a a industry around them is the only way to actually suppress them, not eradicate, because that's impossible, but suppress and keep them at a level where the giant kelp on the Great Southern Reef can regenerate. And so sort of seeing how that could transfer onto land, I feel like this social enterprise, and I can't remember what the business was called, but they were, trying to set it up to be this fertilizer so it could make money and then directly build this business around the intention of managing the species, not with the intention of making money. I think that's probably key rather than it, sort of existing alone as a profitable business. Yeah. That's where you run into issues.
And some of these wild caught animals, things like kangaroo, camel,
yes,
really offer the opportunity for putting kind of an industry into regional and indigenous communities through either ranger programs, control programs, or limited hunting programs as well. So I think some of those opportunities, you get into a space where it's certainly focused on suppression of those animals, but why not generate an industry out of that, or at least generate a self-sustaining business out of that suppression?
Yes.
That's a good, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
To
go ahead.
The devil's advocate.
Yeah.
And I'll side with some of our naysayers. The naysayers would say, but if you industrialize it, you're going to kind of promote why are you going to promote the getting rid of them? It's going to lead, industrializing it is going to lead to a kind of a market. The market's going to want more, then you're going to have to farm it. Is the idea then that you're going to kind of the industry sort of runs out when the feral pig
you just stop eating.
You stop eating them?
Yeah,
like what's the plan?
Okay, so clearly eradication through scientific methods is clearly the best way forward. Nobody's said otherwise.
Yeah.
We just don't have enough money or enough resources to be able to do that. We probably could do that if we were going to invest in nuclear arms or submarines in the way, we're taking that. With that level of investment, you could do it. But with the level of investment that we've currently got, you're not going to be able to eradicate those. So then you're left with this halfway house of introducing some measures that are going to be able to control the animals, but suppress them, but not eradicate them. So you're moving into a suppression kind of mode. The opportunity to remove completely some of those animals and invasive species is gone. In many cases we have to accept that those species are going to be with us forever. And what will happen is, from an evolutionary perspective, is the native species will start to evolve and respond. So we've seen, with cane toad, some birds learn to flip the cane toad over and eat it from its belly, avoiding the poison glands on the back, whereas those birds that eat from the back will die. So you're seeing behavioral evolution. And because it's such an important food source that's come into those ecosystems, they'll start to get disease, they'll start to get parasites, and other animals will evolve ways to avoid them. The problem is that they've come in, it's called the blitzkrieg. It's the kind of blitzkrieg era where a new predator or a new species comes in, it decimates an ecosystem because it's so much better adapted. Yeah. And you've got all this naive animals that are there, and it's just come in and decimated. So you'll have the pushback, and the best way we can help the animals, the native species and plants here, is to help suppress the numbers of those invasives, so that then, evolution will take its course to help suppress.
It's a catch-22, isn't it? Because it's waiting for evolution.
Eating those is part of that, particularly, so probably it's on a case-by-case basis. We are probably never going to be able to completely eradicate rabbits. We're going to go on this cycle of introducing a new virus. And if we can eradicate them, then fine, let's do that. But you've got a population that still want to eat rabbit. You've still got potentially farmed rabbits that could be eaten. Now you need massive controls around those farms to make sure the rabbits don't escape. And if they are escaping and they have to be recontrolled, then you just say, sorry, you're not eating rabbit anymore. Yeah. You put legislation takes over to say it's just too risky to have these animals in our country because of the impact that it causes. $8 billion worth of impacts from rabbits over the time that they've been introduced. So I think a standpoint of don't eat them because you're just going to make the problem worse isn't really fully understanding the intricacy of the issue. It's a blunt, and sure, you probably need some kind of high level kind of advice that's coming in there. But I think when you delve down into it, yeah.
But it's also, I was sort of saying before, I think one of the other factors is with cane toads, for instance.
Yeah.
We've got an abundance of cane toads in Australia. There are many, many places around the world that eat amphibians. We don't eat frogs or toads in Australia, but the rest of the world does. And they have decimated the populations of various amphibians. So we were positing this idea of, can't we eat, if we could turn the cane toad into a kind of a safe product, we would in turn be saving the world's population of frogs, which are, becoming extinct. So there was this kind of, I liked that idea too, that it wasn't just about suppressing, it was a double-edged sword. You could suppress the numbers of cane toads and also save
other species. Yeah.
Which applies to carp too. If carp replaced flake, then we'd be taking pressure off of a lot of these.
That's right, the gummy shark.
Yeah, the gummy shark.
And other species.
Yes,
yeah.
Actually, I was going to say, to answer your question before about what other, in series 2.
Oh, series 2.
I was going to say that I came across a great story the other day, actually, for series 2, which was ostriches.
Okay.
Apparently, ostriches were trendy for a while in the 80s in Australia.
Yeah.
As a meat source, but also as pets.
Yeah.
And there's been there's a few out in the desert still running around.
But they're not really invasive, are they? They're kind of
if there's a
naturalized,
number,
but they're not. I mean, brumbies.
Yes.
Surely. So series 2, we do wild pigs. We do brumbies.
Yeah.
You probably do buffalo.
Buffalo would be good.
I think
Goats.
Yeah.
What about blackberries? Let's throw some plants.
We could do a kind of weed or a
because blackberries actually provide food for a number of birds where you don't, so you have this kind of good and bad.
Yeah, that's right.
They provide habitat and protection for native animals, but obviously they choke ecosystems.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And number 6, what would be number 6?
I'm saying ostriches. I'm fascinated. They're like, it's like spotting the Yeti. I want to go out and try to find a wild ostrich.
I guess it depends how much damage they're doing. It sounds like a fascinating story.
I think there's more about the story.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by that.
But that is what's difficult about.
So maybe a bit more research on that one.
Yeah.
Well, there has to be a story. I think that's what you were about to say, is that there has to be a kind of narrative attached to it. And some of the ones that were... some of the ones that we looked at didn't have great stories around them, unfortunately. It
was like foxes, cause huge damage, but sort of like they just here. There was no crazy law around it in the way there was with, cane toads and even deer was hard for its historical sort of significance, but it just didn't have, like they just were introduced and then they just got out. And that wasn't necessarily that interesting in and of itself.
What was interesting was the fact that no one in Tasmania could kind of get along to kind of work out the problem. Everyone had their own kind of skin in the game. The hunters, just felt like they were the answer, and certain ecologists wanted to just complete eradication was the only way forward, and there didn't seem to be any kind of middle ground. So it was more about we turned it into, well, it's actually a human problem. In fact, the whole series is basically saying that we are the problem.
So maybe Ep 6 season 2.
Humans.
Yeah.
Humans.
That's
we
when
have
we get
to do
humans.
humans.
Okay, let's do humans.
Yeah, we have to do humans.
Yes. Yeah. I guess that was subtextual throughout, but not pointed at. Yeah.
I think early on we did actually write an episode that had humans as episode 6. We actually did, casting our brains back, and that was quickly kiboshed.
Yes.
Yeah. Then you get into pop. Anyway, let's not go there.
Yeah.
I'm gonna come to our final question: hope or wonder
for the future?
For the future?
Hope or wonder? How are they mutually exclusive?
And they don't need to be.
I don't think
You could do hope and wonder.
I think hope and wonder.
I think. Well, I would have thought they kind of coexist. Without wonder, there can be no hope. Or maybe without hope, there can be no wonder. They seem to be part and parcel for me. I think there's hope and wonder.
Yeah. And I think it's in the wonder that, you know, again, talking about how Eat the Invaders is trying to propose these new solutions. It's like the wonder is that, well, okay, it's not working. What can we do? And then in that is inherently, that's hopeful because people are still working at it and trying to find those solutions. But I just don't think, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, eradication is going to happen. That's what it appears to be kind of across the board. A lot of, which is disappointing. But
our hope lies with you.
Yeah, the science is...
It's all about you now, Andy. You and Phil are our hope. I mean, but honestly, I mean, the real, as you said before, I mean, the real...
So your role as filmmakers is to generate the wonder, to re-expose difficult topics and get societal interest back in there, which definitely happened with invasive species, right? People got bored of it, and then you came up with a new way to phrase it as an interesting area.
Absolutely.
But the hope lies with the kind of scientific opportunity to eradicate or at least long-term suppress these species.
Yeah.
I know as well, like Phil, Cassie talking about it sort of reigniting ideas for him and funding opportunities around eating as suppression, but did it kind of click anything in line for you to explore this area?
Apart from getting a bit of hate mail, no. So I think the series has only just gone live. I think it's still early days. What I am seeing is a lot of feedback on the program. We're putting out socials through the Environment Institute, through the University of Adelaide, and it's getting a lot of pickup. There's a lot of interest in the program. I've also been contacted by the Federal Department for Environment.
Really?
Yep. Maybe I should have told you that. And also some of the other state-based departments, and they really appreciated the balanced messaging that was in the program. They understood that it's a complex area, but they said you guys have done a great job to be able to balance the scientific content together with something that's attractive for TV, together with a kind of solution-based focus for the end. So the guys in the Federal Department for Environment are now watching it and promoting it round. I think what we will see is probably because of the program, we'll see increased opportunities around this. Now, I don't think it will be funding for setting up invasive species restaurants, but I think just reigniting the debates around invasive species, it will probably add kudos to keeping cats indoors, not letting cats out. A lot of councils are fighting with that at the moment, and there's pushback around that. From the footage that we see around cats, there's no way you should be letting cats out. They shouldn't be allowed out in the wild.
That was one of the most, I felt like that was one of the most proactive ideas in the show. The thing that we could actually...
So I think this program will really help with some of those
when
things.
You think that, just by, if we could, 70% of cat owners, domestic cat owners, allow their cats to roam, and when they roam, they kill. If we could suppress that number, the 70% to 10%, we immediately save millions of native animals'
billions.
lives.
It's another 3 billion, right?
So that's a very seemingly simple cultural change that could take place. That I'm proud of in this show, that we are kind of shining a light. I know we're saying let's eat a cat, but we're obviously not saying eating cat is going to solve the... No, we need to change our minds, the way that domestic cat owners think. That's just a cultural shift that could save a lot of lives, right?
Matt, Poppy, thank you. Thank you for coming on to Ecofuturist.
Thank you.
Thanks,
and may the hope lies with you, Andy.
Thank you.
Go forth. Save us all.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
I really enjoyed that conversation, and I'm just really impressed with what these guys have done. But don't take my word for it. Go and check it out on iView. And I'm really keen to keep the conversation going with you guys. Post your thoughts in the comments below.